Hello and welcome back to my channel to what I think is the best season of the year, Halloween. I am very excited to talk to you about my costume this year. I had a few different ideas, but this is one that had been rolling around my head for a few years. I like doing couples costumes with my husband just because he's into it too, and I don't know, I think they're more fun when there's an added element to it. So this year we went very classic. I love the classic monster movies, and I think some of the designs, especially the one for this one, are very interesting, very unique, and I wanted to take advantage of that. Before I go into that though, you might be wondering, well, what I'm wearing, or if you've seen one of my videos, you've seen a little bit about my new cardigan that I released earlier this month. This is the Spinster cardigan, which I designed with hobby yarn. Of course, very aptly themed for today's video, but I think it's a cardigan that I will be wearing basically all year long, spooky season or not. Some of my testers did some really cool color combinations, and I can't wait to see what you guys make when you get the pattern. I actually have a little sale going on this Halloween. From now until the 31st, you can get an extra discount. You can get it at Hobby Yarn as a kit, and they have their own discount too, but you can also get it in my Etsy and my Ravelry shops. So no code needed, just go into there, and maybe you won't need it for this Halloween, but you can need it for next one. Back to the costume in question. I wanted to go with Frankenstein's monster and the Bride of Frankenstein, both really based on the movie more than the tale itself. You know, the Boris Karloff Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein with the famous wig. I actually watched those movies for the first time last year. I love all movies, and I just didn't have a chance to watch it for whatever reason, and I really liked it. The Bride of Frankenstein one maybe even better because it's closer to the book, ironically, even though it's a sequel. And the only sad thing is that the Bride of Frankenstein herself, even though it's on the title, is barely in the movie. But all this to say, the aesthetic of the look I was going for was totally based on her performance and her costume in the movie itself. In general, I felt like this was a very simple costume and very effective one, and I wanted to make every single part of it. So that meant figuring out the wig and then figuring out the costume itself, like the dress that she's wearing. It's not really a dress. If you watch the film, she's created just like Frankenstein's monster. She's created from different parts of the body, and then she's revealed at the end. So that's why she's wearing those kind of bandages on her arms, because initially she's completely bandaged, and then they take them off and she still has the one in her arms, and she's wearing this gown that kind of is like a cross between like a hospital type of gown and an actual dress. So that was the first challenge. I left the wig to figure out a little bit later, and I started with that. So I'm going to show you what my process was for creating this costume. I did not use a pattern for this one. I completely freehanded it, the whole thing, which I mean, again, it was simpler. So I didn't think I needed to find a pattern. I didn't want to do like the sexy version, or I really wanted to try to stay as much as possible close to the original design, just because I love it so much. So I did that, and I will show you what my process was, how I got from the reference idea to the actual execution, and what materials I used. And if you wanted to, honestly, you could copy the method that I did. Again, it was very simple and freehanded. So here is my Bride of Frankenstein gown, I'm gonna call it.
Alive. It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I started with my piece of fabric, which was about 4 feet long and 44 inches wide, and I started by folding it in half lengthwise and then widthwise to just mark the center spot of it. I didn't even cut a pattern. I just intended to make a hole right in the middle of the fabric, and so I marked the middle, and then I marked a few inches to each side. I think I started with 4 inches to each side of the middle. Maybe I made it a little bit larger after that, but it was just to make this hole that was big enough to fit my head through it. So here I'm marking the 8 inches, and then I used a seam ripper to start the hole, which I could then use my scissors and cut through that line. So I started this way so I could make sure that the hole was big enough but also not too big, and that it fit right in the middle, that I was long enough. Here I am trying it on. I am 5'5" or 1.60 m long height, so that's why I got 4 yards, but you can get longer if you need to. So then I marked basically a rectangle 2 inches high from the opening, and then I cut that opening to each side, but I didn't cut those extra flaps in the middle because the idea was to be able to fold those in just to clean up the edges and make the hole a little bigger and more like a neckline. So after cutting those 2 inches to each of the sides, I just folded in twice, and then I use my pins to just make sure that it stayed in place. Did not touch the sides, we're gonna work on those later, and I went in and sewed these in with my sewing machine. Next up, and very importantly, was my shoulder pad. So to make my shoulder pad, I marked 10 inches on one side of the page and 8 inches on the other side. Roughly measure this from my shoulder, and then I drew a line from each one of them to the center, and then I added another 1 inch line in the middle, and that way I created like this rounded shape. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't even use a ruler for that. I just freehanded it. But the idea was to make this shape for my shoulder pad that was quite square, so that it would stay up on my shoulders and create this like very stiff shoulder shape. And of course I cut my fabric also from cotton fabric, and I sew it in with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so it will be a little bit smaller than what we measured, but still big enough that I could fill it up with the filling that would keep it straight up on my shoulder. So very carefully I sew it in. I sew those 2 pieces together, and I did this twice, once for each shoulder, so I could create 2 shoulder pads. And of course I left an opening, so I didn't close it all the way, so that I could turn it inside out and create this little pouch basically. Before I turn it inside out, I cut the corners so that it wouldn't be too bulky inside, and I also cut some of the seam allowance around the rounded part at the top, and then I went ahead and turned it inside out, as you can see here. Once inside out, you can see the shoulder pad shape, and here I have one that was already been filled, and I'm going to show you how I did that filling. And once it's filled, it's very stiff. So I used quilting batten, actually, that was just left over from the quilt that I made earlier this year, and making sure that my batting was doubled up, I roughly marked it. I didn't have to be perfect, again, just small enough that it would fit, and I cut 2 pieces. I ended up actually cutting 4 pieces for each one of the shoulder pads, just so that it would be very stiff and would stay in the shoulder pad. So I cut that and I put it inside of the shoulder pad that we created earlier, and then I added an extra piece in the center just so that the top of the shoulder pad would be a little bit stiffer and thicker, really. And so I used just whatever was left over from what I cut, and then cut the excess of the batten. So you can see how all filled up. It's pretty stiff, and it looks really nice. I had both of them filled up, and now all I have to do was use my needle and thread to close it up. I did this by hand. You could do it with the sewing machine. I just thought it would be faster and easier to just do it by hand. And then I put it on my dress form, the dress form was very useful just to see where it would be placed. And of course you see that there's a lot of fabric left over, so what I did was I started draping it on top of the shoulder pad and then using pins to kind of keep that shape there. And then at the end of the fabric, towards that last bit, I just folded inwards, kind of covering the shoulder pad, and you can see it creates a really nice shape around the shoulders, and it really helps with that bulky shoulder look. And then I just literally went in with the shoulder pads and in place on my dress form, which I guess you could do this with another person if you don't have a dress form, but I just went in and kind of sew those the fabric and the way that I had draped it just straight up on the shoulder pad. Again, it does not need to be perfect, it's just a costume, so it didn't really matter if you can kind of see the stitches. I just wanted to make sure that it was safely attached and that it wouldn't fall off while I was wearing it. So I just did that for both of the shoulders. Then all I had left was to sew the sides of the gown, and I marked where I wanted the opening of the sleeve to end, and then I went in and just sew it inside out with right sides together. And I did the same for both of the sides all the way down, even though it's a little bit longer than what I needed it to be, but I still went in and sewed that all the way down. Next, I tried it on, and I had my husband help me mark where it touched the ground and where I wanted it to be the length. So I used that as a guide to mark where I was gonna cut it, and I wanted it to be long enough that it touched the ground, but not so long that it was dragging so I wouldn't fall. So I went in and roughly marked it and cut it, and then I folded in once to create a hem, and that would just finish at the end of the dress. You could fold the hem twice if you wanted it to be cleaner, but at this point I just kind of wanted to be over with it. And finally, not to waste any single part of this fabric that I bought, I fold the leftovers in half, and I cut those, and then I fold them in half again and cut them again, so that I would have long pieces of fabric that I would later use as my bandages on the arms. What was nice is that because it was already sewn together, I could have really long pieces of fabric to use in my arms.
While I was making that gown, or the dress, or whatever you want to call it, I was also starting to think about the wig. So it's a really cool wig. I wore a wig last year for my Phantom of the Opera costume, and that was fine. I don't know, I wanted to try something different just because her hair is so original and different. I tried looking for some tutorials and patterns of wigs, and there was one that I was kind of going for, but I didn't quite like the look of it. But it gave me an idea that I could actually crochet this, because I felt like I could freehand style it easily enough. And basically what it is a long tooth that goes on top of your head, and the important part is that you have the two white streaks going from the temples up, which is like the classic look that it's easy to identify. So I decided to go with crochet. I started using yarn that I already had left over, actually from this sweater, so I had the white left over and a little bit of black. I knew it wasn't going to be enough, so I bought another skein of just whatever craft black acrylic yarn. I didn't want to go for anything expensive or fancy since it was just going to be a wig. So that's what I went for. I didn't spend much then, maybe like $4 on the skein of yarn or ball of yarn, and then another $5 on the stuffing that I used, and that was pretty much it. You can see how the way that the wig worked. I didn't even count how many stitches I had. Basically what I did is I created a long crochet chain that wrapped around my head tight, but just about enough that it could fit my head. And then I started crocheting without any increases, just again to have like that band that would be at the edge of my head. And then I started doing increases and creating kind of like a mushroom shape. So this would be the whole, or it would be the inside of the wig, like whatever's holding the hair per se. I did again completely freehanded it. I have to restart and start a few times just to get the shape right, and I did not even take notes. I did a few increases and just kind of created this mushroom shape. And I kept trying it on to make sure that it would be too big on my head. Like I wanted it to be big but not gigantic, and the way it was, because it would fit right like a hat. It didn't need to be too huge for it to work. And then once I had that holding shape, I started creating coils with crochet. So the coils kind of starting at the base of the wig and then going up just 60, 70 chain and doing single crochet coils, which are done really with just a long chain and then single crocheting 3 times into each of the chain stitches. So that creates that kind of like curly hair coil, which I've done in the past for other projects. So I did a bunch of black ones, and then again making sure the white was on the temples. I actually did 2, like a long one and a shorter one, just to create more of like hair effect, because those are gonna stand out over the hair, over the rest of the wig, which was completely black. I almost went with brown, but because my hair is black, I felt like it would almost blend more with whatever little baby hairs you would see in my face, so I kept it black. So that's really how simple the wig was. It was funny because I thought it looked very much not like hair, but for I don't know, there's something about the hair that is so bizarre, different. The hairstyle is unique, I would say, that when you see the wig, when you wear the wig and people see it, it really does look like hair. I don't know what it is about it. It doesn't look like a hat. It kind of worked. I did stuff it with just like regular stuffing, not completely, just enough that it would hold that shape. It wouldn't like flop around, and it worked. It stayed on my head, and it held that shape. It wasn't heavy. It was perfect. Some of my friends, when they saw me with the wig, it took them like a second turn to go, wait, did you make that? I had to go, yes, I crocheted it. Isn't that great? So I was able to fit sewing and crochet into a single project and not die in the process. That was it. Other than that, I just had to do makeup. Most of my husband's costume was the makeup, which we just bought a kit and went at it. The only thing that we bought really that wasn't material was the bolts that go on his neck, because I didn't really know how to make those and we didn't have a lot of time, and I found those really cheap, so that worked. And other than that, the makeup, and we thrifted him a jacket and just dressed him in black, and he was good to go. And then for me, the makeup is luckily very simple, mostly concentrated on creating that like eyebrow shape that is very pointy, and then red lipstick, regular kind of makeup, and like kind of dramatic theater but normal makeup. And then try to add like the very last minute, like literally seconds before people arrived to our party, I was adding the scars on the neck. And that's it. That was my costume. I think I really enjoyed wearing this. It was very comfortable. I did have to wear like a white dress underneath, just because it was a little bit see-through. In the end, the fabric was, just white cotton, so you could see through it a bit. And I wore that underneath, and I don't think you could really tell that I was wearing another dress under. It was really fun. The arms, the bandages on the arms were not working that well. I did secure them with safety pins, but they would still fall around. I don't know. I guess when I moved my arms, maybe they would have to be stiff in order to stay, or maybe I should have used real bandages. But they looked really good when they were in place. They were just not the most comfortable thing because they kept falling off. So maybe I think I might fix this by actually sewing it, like pinning it in place and then sewing some of it kind of like globes, and that could be the solution for that. But I didn't have time to do that. I really just did it very last minute for the arms. So if I were to wear this costume again, I think that's how I would fix it. Other than that, 10 out of 10. I love this costume. It's really fun. It's very comfortable. It looks really cool. And it's very easy to make. And I think if you would want to make it, I 100% recommend trying it. And watch the movie to get into character before. It's like a really short, an hour and a half or less movie. So yes, that was this year's spooky video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a wonderful Halloween and happy making.